Marianne Novy is an adoptee who grew up at a time when this kind of information was kept secret within a family. As Marianne got older and went to college, she began to cross paths with other adoptees and became curious about her birth family. Over time, she was able to access her original birth certificate, and then later on, she began meeting members of her birth family in person. Marianne navigated her way through reunion with her birth family, which came with a fair amount of ups and downs. Later, she began to become interested in experiences of others and began a project during which she read 45 adoption memoirs and discussed the themes she found for a book she wrote on the topic. Learn about her journey to compiling her book and the discoveries she made along the way, this time on Adoption Uncovered. Can you take us to the beginning of it? What made you decide you wanted to read all these memoirs and help us learn from them all? Where did that idea start?
Well, I guess it was because I was reading memoirs and I found them really fascinating. And of course, the ones that I read most were by adoptees. And I taught a course on adoption and literature, in which we um, did not mostly read memoirs, but we did read a few. And we did see a film, uh, first person plural, which is directed by a Korean adoptee, Deanne Borsche Lim. So this was like a memoir in the way in which she told us her life story, through the film. So I've found it very interesting to uh, teach that film, teach memoirs, sometimes together with the novels that were not by people directly involved with adoption. So, at any rate, I started to write. I did write one article, which was all about adoptee memoirs, and was involved in this organization that I mentioned, the Alliance for the Study of Adoption and Culture, which was also affiliated with the Modern Language Association, which is what people who teach English or French or Spanish or Italian literature are often members of. And so very often we were able to have a session on the program dealing with adoption, and actually became an organization that they would guarantee a session to. So I would be able to meet people who were doing work on adoption in other ways. Some of them actually that I met were people who were historians and anthropologists who were working on adoption. I went to the American Studies Conference where there was a session dealing with adoption. I met at Carnegie Mellon, another university in Pittsburgh, a woman who had written a book in which she had interviewed adoptees, adoptive parents, and birth parents. So this was years ago. In a sense, it was the same thing that I just finished doing, except that she was doing it directly by interviewing them personally, while as opposed to looking at things that they had written that they put together as a memoir, which was what I did. But it was a book that put together different perspectives. And at that point, not that many adoptee memoirs had been published when she wrote that book, and certainly not that many birth mother memoirs, although there have always been adoptive parent memoirs, because that's the position with the most general public admiration, I think. Uh, that's the thing that you have the choice about doing in a much bigger way than with the other two positions. It seemed like this was a good thing to do, to make it possible for people with different positions with regard to adoption to learn about how it looks from another point of view. And I found that there were some adoptive parents who had read adoptees' memoirs and really learned from them. They sometimes would mention that. that they felt because of that, that they knew it was really important for their children to be in touch with their ancestral culture, and even if in some case they still had living relatives, to actually meet them. Um, so it was notable that adoptive parents' memoirs showed great differences in their consciousness. That is, there were people who wrote with that view, and then there were others who had not read any of these memoirs, apparently, who really um, did not want their children's adaptive status to be that visible. One actually says, I definitely did not want to adopt someone of another race because I didn't want to be reminded always that she was adopted.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, this is the person whose memoir I felt the worst about as I read. In most cases I was feeling really positive about the memoirists, but uh, that person I couldn't help but be critical of, and and there were a few others who didn't think that the ancestry was a very important thing that I had some critical lines about.
So you read memoirs from adoptive parents and adoptees and first parents, all of them?
Right, that was really the part of the point of the book,
Right,
to get
right.
all these different perspectives together so that it would not be a book that we would be only read by people from one group, but that people could really find what it looked like from the other standpoint in this way.
So did you find a lot of issues that connected them or issues that were very different from those different perspectives?
Well, one of the things that I think was related here is the problems with adoption agencies. The fact that they didn't give enough advice or they didn't give information. In both cases, that is to say, both adoptees and birth parents wanted communication about health history, for instance, in the family. And in some cases, the agency just would not pass that on. Birth mother memoirist just told me how she kept trying and trying to get them to tell her adopted away daughter about things that she had inherited, and the fact that she had had some kind of medication during pregnancy that has been found to have bad effects. And she wanted to pass that information on, but the agency just refused. And the adoptive parents, when she finally met them, they sympathized with her. They really wanted to get the information also. Um, and the adoption agency hadn't given it to them. So anyway, that was one of the points of contact. Problems with agencies, dishonesty, stonewalling, and sometimes social workers also, were involved in this. Again, there were the people that ought to have been giving more advice in cases of transracial adoption, and and weren't doing that. And there were other ways in which, for example, the medical treatment that birth mothers got from doctors or nurses. Sometimes it was good and sometimes it was bad. Uh, there were cases where, for various reasons, they couldn't get an abortion. And in a couple of cases, the pregnancy test had not shown that they were pregnant when they were. Uh,
Mm.
and so the doctor had not really been concerned about this situation. He just assumed the test was accurate, and when she came back and now had a positive pregnancy test, it was too late for him to do anything about it.
Oh my goodness.
So there were
Right.
there were cases like that, cases of the maternity homes that they stayed in, sometimes were very uncomfortable. There was variation, sometimes there was a sense of sisterhood, um, but sometimes there was a sense that, we're all telling lies here. We're not allowed to reveal our real names. Um, there were a lot of ways in which that was a very uncomfortable period. Sometimes there were very elaborate uh, plans that involved pretending that they were in a totally different place than they were. Uh,
Oh my goodness.
you know, getting somebody to mail postcards with a different postmark. Yes. No, this is from a couple of memoirists, and one of them talks about how her family really had this tendency to cover things up. And this was um, this was something that they had done with a relative of theirs and taken his photo out of all the family photos. And so this was a kind of continuation of this, and this pretense that they had, around her pregnancy and her being away in the maternity home. The fact that this is the time of pregnancy is it's a very difficult time, and birth mothers have a lot of trauma afterwards usually. Um, and again, this is something that very often there is a commonality that they really do want to see the child that they had. They really do still feel connected. So, this is certainly one of the points of contact between many birth mothers and adoptees, that they wanted to get back in touch in some way, and in some cases, the relationship um, went very well. In some cases, it was more strained, but they developed a relationship anyway for all the difficulties that they had. Usually, this was really part of so many of the memoirs. It seems like people who didn't want to search with regard to adoption. Well, maybe I just decided I didn't want to write about those memoirs, but it seemed like most of the adoptees who wrote memoirs really did want to search and did search. Did find at least one birth parent and maybe both. And in a few cases, um, they with their birth mother had totally rejected the one that I mentioned before, Lori Jaquila. Um, and her birth father had also vanished. But in most of the other cases, some kind of relationship is possible. And as I said, sometimes it's a very, very good relationship. Um, in a few cases, the birth parents were actually the ones who were looking. Uh, and sometimes it was kind of a coincidence that we're both looking at the same time in a way, because now there are reunion registries, as you know. So a couple of people put their names in the reunion registry and then discovered that their birth mother wanted to meet them because she had also put her name in there. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Wonderful. What
Yeah.
so what other themes did you see, or what other lessons did you learn when you were looking at over all these memoirs? Were there any other connections or things we can pull from those?
It is really good for adoptees to be able to uh, meet other adoptees, from childhood onward. This is most obvious with children who are from the same country, with families with children from China, and there are other groups, many other groups similar to that from other countries, uh, and so it's good to be able to talk about your situation with others who share it. It would be. Um, I think now there are probably agencies that also have ways that people who are adopted from, uh, adopted domestically can meet other adoptees uh, while they're growing up, or later on if they want to. So I would say, that sense of a, a community, that sense of finding other people who share your experience, whatever way, I think that is really important. I really wanted people to understand, as I was just saying, there really are many different experiences that people have with regard to searching and finding. And also that both adoptees and adoptive parents might be really scared that there will be rejection. That, in one case, the adoptee might be afraid of being rejected by birth parents. And on the other hand, an adoptive parent might be afraid that if their child finds birth parents, that they will be rejected. And of course, they also might have fear on behalf of their children that their children will be rejected too. Because sometimes it does happen, but not really very often. That is, in the memoirs that I read, there was really only one case in which the birth mother was really hostile and rejecting to her daughter, the memoirs author. Uh, and I think I would like this to be a source of reassurance, and from the other kind of fear of adoptive parents that their child will leave them. Again, that doesn't happen. No, that in literature sometimes it does, but that's a myth. No, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in real life. I mean, somebody told me about a book in which the adoptee wanted to live with the birth parent for a year, and that this turned out to be a disaster. That's not the sort of thing that happens in real life. That's the sort of thing somebody might imagine. Well, this would make an interesting novel. But if it did ever happen, that person did not write about it in their memoir, at any rate. So anyway, I really wanted people not to be afraid of the worst thing happening. And I also just thought was important to get a sense of the differences in the way that adoptees can be brought up untreated by their parents. That is, some parents are um, much more able to talk about adoption in an open and positive way. Some parents have even, let's say, gifts from birth parents that they can pass on. Some parents are very good about trying to pass on the culture that the child has inherited. Uh, for example, in um, Mei-Ling Hopgood's memoir, Lucky Girl, she talks about how her parents would, from very early on, say to her, "You're our beautiful adopted baby." And this was in the 1970s, I guess. She was adopted from Taiwan, and they really were very interested in having some kind of Asian culture, getting her a doll with Chinese, for instance, features. And eventually well, not too much later, they adopted two boys who were Korean. So it was a family in which the influence of Asian culture was very visible, not just in the children, but also in the decorations that they had. And now there are more active programs like Families with Children from China, which did not exist at that time, that people can be part of. It's really important for transracial adoptees to see people who look like themselves. And some of the memoirs that I wrote about are by transracial adoptees who were very isolated and didn't see anyone. And even Mei Ling Hopgood, who I was talking about, um, did not have any other children in her school who were Asian, in spite of the fact that she had brothers who were. So she still did have that kind of sense of isolation until she got to college and she finally met other Asian Americans. So she really did have this sense of discomfort with her looks, in spite of all the ways in which she was really close to her parents and really happy with them in so many ways. But it really, when she was able to meet her birth parents and in particular her sisters, all of them living in Taiwan or China, this did make a big difference to her. So things like that about what it's like to grow up without anybody who looks at all like you in a big way. Yeah, it's important that people who are adopting children, know about that. Uh, People really ought to be better prepared for transracial adoption than they often are. I found that in talking about their experiences, both adoptive parents and adoptees felt that the parents were not well enough prepared, that the agencies did not give them the information that they ought to give them.
Of the many things she learned along the way, she realized the impression she had of open adoption didn't seem to be the whole story.
I do want to say something about open adoption
Yeah, go ahead.
because this is a relatively new way of adopting. That is, people use the term in a very broad way, and sometimes by open adoption they just mean that the adoptive parents meet the birth parents. And sometimes they exchange, exchange addresses and actually exchange photographs regularly, uh, maybe even meet every year. There's this kind of spectrum of how much you can keep in touch. I think the idea of the parents and the birth parents meeting and keeping in touch with the child is a big change, but it probably works out better for the child than for the birth mother, in fact, because I know this because of this book called Relinquished, especially that I mentioned, because this includes interviews with birth parents, birth mothers, who are really initially they feel good about the fact that they can see their child, but as time goes on, even if they keep up with the relationship, they have this wish that they were really the child's mother in a very active way, rather than being in this ambiguous position of, sort of mother, but not mother legally anymore. And in a position where the adoptive parents can, move anywhere and make it impossible for them to really meet regularly. Um, yeah. So anyway, I thought that it was a big improvement, and um, it turns out that it still has basic problems of the birth mother's continuing sense of loss. In some cases, it is better than being totally out of the contact, but it's still, even if they're in contact, there's still a sense of loss. So I was really interested to learn about that. It's painful. That sense of loss continues to be painful. This is there's some of that in this one memoir called God and Jetfire by Amy Seek, and she finishes the book at a point where it seems like she feels that she has worked things out. It ends with her son going up in a plane with her father. Uh, one of her goals was to get him connected with her parents. And she really admires the adoptive parents. Their values are similar, but at the same time, she still feels some discomfort. And she wrote a little bit about this for a conference later on. And she was really unable to end it with a positive note that she ended her book with. I did have this feeling for a while, maybe adoption, open adoption, maybe this is the cure all, that makes it possible for adoption to continue and people in all parts of the relationship to feel good about it. But it turns out um, that is very, very rare. It is important in open adoption that adoptees and parents can find out about, for example, hereditary health issues more easily, perhaps other issues related to the child's previous experience. Maybe it will reassure them to see that the birth mother, maybe still cares about them. And the birth mother may be reassured to see that the child is doing well. However, there are still problems. I write about a memoir by Amy Seek, who is a birth parent in an open adoption. And she still has a sense of loss and confusion about being ambiguously a mother. There's a recent book by Gretchen Sisson called Relinquished, which recounts a lot of interviews with birth mothers at various stages of open adoption. And they find that sometimes, very early on in the process, they feel very happy about being able to see their adopted away child. But uh, later on, this does not continue to make them feel happy, that they are more likely to feel a sense of loss that they were not able to raise this child. So now I had thought that open adoption was really going to be a solution to a lot of the problems around adoption. But in fact, actually, it still leaves a lot of problems unsolved. And sometimes the relationship uh, is seems like it's very close. People actually, believe it or not, take vacations together, have regular visits, maybe once a month, something like that. And even in that kind of situation, sometimes uh, people move away for unavoidable reasons, and it's hard to maintain. And that kind of breaking apart because of a move can certainly happen less often when it's not as close as that would be. So you can maintain open adoption in many cases, and it probably is better than a closed adoption, but it still has a lot of problems.
So are you indicating that it would be better to like avoid adoption completely or to do it in a different way, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it depends on a lot of things. It is interesting to see that in the United States, a lot of adoptions happen because the birth mother is convinced that she is not able to take care of the child. And
Hmm.
one of the reasons this is so frequent in the United States is that we have so few benefits for people with young children. In European countries, there's a lot more by way of help uh, for family benefits, early childhood education, childcare, uh, parental leave, things that we have much less of in the United States. So this is why it seems to me, at least one reason why the number of children adopted in the United States, the number of infants, is proportionately between 2 and 20 times larger than in other comparable countries. So at any rate, that if we had more support for parents of young children, this would probably mean that there would be fewer adoptions. So anyway, that's a big change. I'm afraid it would involve drastic change in our politics and government. So, I can't say that's the answer now because it will take too long to actually bring that about. Um, so I think that there are people who are writing about adoption and have counseled people who do stay in touch with the birth family in a very respectful and generous way. I think James Gritter is one of the people who have written about this. So I think it is possible to have open adoptions that do remain open and that are respectful and are more supportive, so that the uh, birth parents become like extended family members. That is pretty rare, but it seems like it is possible, and I think that would be better.
Find out where to get Marianne's book and how to access all the memoirs she read on my website, Adoption Uncovered. And thank you